Alright, so today's video we're talking about photography and capturing good photos. So if you look at our Instagram page, you see a lot of kills and you see some occasional just out and about in the field. And what I wanted to talk about is what we can do as hunters to share the experiences out in the outdoors. So big misconception is that a successful hunt ends with a kill, and as you guys know, with Cervicide, I mean that's definitely not the focal point. 2018, I want to really put more emphasis in taking away from some of that. So while we definitely want the outcome to be good, to have a harvest, it's all about capturing those moments. Okay, so something I see that I think people go wrong a lot of times with. And it's an easy time to do these things. I think it's a great time to experiment with your equipment, but it's not always the content that we're looking for, or if you're just trying to post stuff on your own Instagram, is just taking pictures of your setup. So I mean, it's easy to sit there and you got your bow and you want to do a close broadhead, but unless you're a manufacturer and you're looking for an advertisement of your product, those pictures aren't really doing any justice. So there's a couple dynamics that make for a good picture, and we're going to include a couple examples in this video here. To make a picture something that people are interested, there's a couple things that we need. Okay, so good lighting is very critical. Okay, that's something that you can't really add or take away later. So if the picture is properly exposed, you can go into your applications like your Snapseed. I'm a big fan of Snapseed. You can go into your Lightroom and then you can adjust the levels. But if you start out with an underexposed or an overexposed photo, we're not going to capture that. So if you're using a smartphone, I mean, they do a great job of getting the clarity and everything on there properly. If you're using a DSLR, you have a ton of potential, but you got to watch the settings. So a lot of your DSLRs, like your Canon Rebels, I mean, you put it on auto and you just click the button and you're pretty much in good shape. If it's a lower light photo with the DSLR, I mean, you want to have a good tripod because the exposure is going to be longer, and that's going to affect if there's any movement with a longer exposure. The shutter's open, you're going to see that, okay? And you can't clean that up after the fact. With a smartphone, we don't really have the ability to control the shutter speed, so it's one of those point and clicks. Make sure if it's a night photo with a smartphone that you have some external lights. The flashes have definitely improved a lot, but we can get bad shadows, okay? And again, that's something that we can't change after the fact. So if there's one thing to harp on, make sure that you have the exposure correct, okay? If you're familiar with your camera and the settings, then by all means change them. If you're not, you know, the auto settings, I mean, technology has really improved. It's nothing to be ashamed of to shoot stuff on the automatic settings. You know, years ago when people were using film and you didn't have all this stuff, I mean, a photographer was truly professional. You had to know the ins and outs of that equipment. Now you don't really need to know that stuff. What you do need to know is that aside from the exposure and getting stuff, you know, in that range, we need to set up the picture to make it really good. So there's something called the rule of thirds, okay? And the rule of thirds, the idea is that the subject should be on one of the thirds of the photo. Now there might be certain circumstances where you have, say, two trees or two buildings, and you know, you might have a deck that's moving down through, where you want everything to be centered and lined up. But that's something that you're going to have to really take your time. A lot of times there's some distortion too, so in retrospect, when you touch the photo up, you're going to actually have to do some things to make sure everything looks straight on the photo. So for running gun out in the field, I really recommend you get the rule of thirds. And what that's doing is adding a whole dynamic to the shot, you know. So if we have a deer that we're holding, okay, or if it happens to be, you know, you're holding a gun, instead of just taking that random picture, get somebody in the picture. And this is another dynamic I'm going to touch on here. But have that offset and let yourself see some of the scenery. You know, the old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. It's very true, and that's how your picture should be. So they shouldn't be so tight that you can't see other stuff going on. That's, you know, you want the picture to strike people in different ways. So the rule of thirds is something that I recommend that everybody do. A lot of times, I see pictures come in from guys, and they're rushed. They're underexposed because they don't have good lighting. The shot was in the evening, and then they did a nighttime picture, and they don't have good lighting. Make sure that you get that tacked down, number one, okay? And then number two, I see a lot of photos, and it's pictures where the subject, the hunter and the deer, okay, if we're using that as examples, just shoved up right in the middle, and we don't really see what's going on behind. Or when we do see what's going on behind, it's a house with the porch light on and it's distracting. Take the time, if you have something that you shot, harvested, to get a nice picture. Even if you have to leave after you already brought the deer out and gutted it out and go back in the woods to set it up. Who says there's anything wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with that at all, okay? Because a picture is going to last a lot longer than anything, okay? Take a nice picture, okay? That's something that you can look back on and share. So take some pride in that. Common thing that I hear people complain about, well, I didn't have a good camera person, okay? With smartphones, you can self-time stuff and take an amazing picture. With DSLRs, you can do the same. You can put it on a timer, you can put it on a tripod. Take some time. I've done makeshift stuff where I've taken my backpack and even gotten rocks and pieces of wood and made a makeshift way to take a picture on my own with a timer. Another thing, if you have somebody, okay, and you might say, well, they don't have the eye for doing it, all right? Frame the shot up yourself. I just recently had a picture, and it came out really cool. It was me and my dog and a squirrel that I shot. I was up in northern Pennsylvania, and there was snow, and I actually shot the squirrel up on top of the mountain. We took the picture down at the bottom of the mountain where you could see all the stuff in the background, and I was with my fiance, and she's only 5'3", and I have a lifted truck, and she started taking pictures, and I looked at them and said, these aren't going to work. I said, you're too low. Well, how? And she said, how am I supposed to do this? So I framed the shot up. I took the camera, and I held it up to my truck, and I said, this is where I want it. So she came over, she grabbed my camera, and she's down here, okay? And I got my dog, and I framed up. I already had the shot framed up, and then I stood there, and we took a picture, and it was an awesome photo. That's one of those things where you need to take control if you want to have good pictures, because a lot of times if you're in the picture, somebody else is going to be doing it. So don't be afraid to frame up the shot, okay? And it's awesome with the cameras that we have today. You can see everything right there, and make sure you get those shots. So exposure, rule of thirds, okay, and the backdrop's a big thing. Personally, and I know a lot of people disagree with this, but I am a big fan of the old school, deer in the back of the truck pictures. I really like those because it's something that's a bit of a tradition. Outside of that, though, I'm not a big fan, when it's a picture of deer in the yard or just different things like that. I like to see it as natural as possible. So I know that's like a conflicting thing by saying the two, but I really recommend that you get as much of the scenery that happen when you're fishing or hunting or doing whatever that was there. It adds so much to the photo, okay? And then, afterwards you can sit there and you can mess with the highlights and mess with the contrast and the different things, but make sure things are exposed properly. Now, the other dynamic that I wanted to touch on, which I alluded to earlier, where we have guys sending us pictures of their stabilizer or their broadhead or whatever. Like I said, those are good pictures because they're easy to sit there and do in the stand, but they don't really do much. So a dynamic that, and this is hard to teach, but I want you to be conscious of this to be a better photographer, is to bring in emotion to your photo, okay? So one of the best ways to bring in some sort of emotion is to have something organic, something living. You, your dog, the deer that you shot, a deer that's out there running around in the field, okay? All the other matter is inorganic. Your bow, the riser, close-ups of this and that. This stuff, a couple years ago, I think it was cool when people were getting crafty with their cameras. They got low f-stop, they can blur out the background. But it's kind of played out. One thing that never gets old is people's emotions, okay? So capturing that. I saw an awesome photo on Sitka on their Instagram just recently, and it was just a young hunter. He probably was 5 or 6 years old. He was just a little kid, and he was running, and he had a goose over his shoulder, and like just the smile, he was just glowing, you know. And that's what made that picture amazing. I mean, everything else was good. You can see a nice backdrop, and he was in focus, obviously, and good color, everything else. But it was the smile on that kid's face, and that's something that's what you want to capture the essence of what is there, and that's what makes a picture worth 1,000 words. That's what makes people want to like and interact and engage in your photos. So we can do it with smiles. We can do it where guys are doing a high five, you know, when you shot something, but it doesn't have to be a kill. And I want guys to be able to start to focus on that too, especially in the off season. You know, you shouldn't feel like that you're measuring your success of a hunt based on whether you have something dead to show that. I mean, camaraderie, you know, your friends around a campfire with the cabin in the background, the stars, you know, and you can do that the long exposure, but then the guy's got to sit still. I mean, you got to think about all the different elements, but capture real events, capture things with the camera that people don't get to see, you know, that, but they can relate to. So the campfire thing, laughing, smiling, you know, and then you can have emotion even in, you know, instead of just taking a picture of the broadhead or the fletching of the arrow, you know, when somebody's drawn back to shoot. I mean, even there where they're focused, and if you take a good picture on the archer, that's something that's capturing emotion. Or when that arrow is touched off and released, and just seeing, you know, different things like that. But capturing emotion, something that I don't hear people talk about, but that can make or break your photo. And you can do it with your hunting dogs, you know, where the dog is just really like staring and focusing, or when they're running and you know their face is flopping but you see that in the picture with the movement. Those are things that take practice, but once you develop the eye for that, and you take in to make sure that your exposure is good, okay? And the best, like I said, the best workaround for that is just use the auto stuff. At nighttime, lighting is definitely critical, but that eliminates a lot of work. Use the auto settings, unless you're really comfortable with your gear, okay? But what is beyond, and just think about when you're hunting. I mean, if you're going to shoot at something, you're always paying attention to what's beyond you. Same with the camera. You know, you want to look at the subject that you're taking a picture of, but make sure that you're focused on what's beyond, okay? Use the rule of thirds and offset the subject to the side, you know, and just to break it down, I mean, if this was the rule of thirds here, okay, so we draw 2 lines and we have a third here, you know, that's just, it's just a way to create more depth into the photo. But a photo should be a lot more than just, you know, just taking a click. I mean, you got to think about these different elements, all right? So get things in focus. You know, if you want to mess with, really cool thing is like the new iPhones with the portrait mode. I mean, we can blur things out, but I really suggest you be careful. I've seen guys send pictures in with using the blurring mode, where it blurs things out, but you have like a honeycomb riser, and the camera can't differentiate the background, you know, the leaves in the back here from the riser, and it looks sloppy. So a good portrait photo, you know, is good with people or a solid subject, but you do have to watch some of the fine details. So I would recommend, if you're taking pictures, if you do use the portrait mode, do that, but take a regular picture too. It's digital images. You can take 100 of them. It's not really costing you much space on your camera roll, so you can always go back and delete stuff that you don't want to use, okay? But get your subject, all right? Get things beyond that. Make sure things that are properly exposed. Don't be afraid to take several photos, okay? And work on getting emotion. If you can master that, you don't need to ever have a kill, and you can have an awesome Instagram gallery. You can have awesome pictures if you can figure out how to capture emotion on a picture. So those are a couple of dynamics, and just some quick tips. But biggest thing to take away if you're just getting into photography, and if you're not familiar with the things like the rule of thirds or different things like exposure, I mean, there's definitely tons of tips and tutorials online that you can dig deeper and learn more about that. But I really recommend that you start to think bigger. So a lot of guys that want to take pictures, they're just taking a picture. Just realize that there is a lot more layers and depth behind that, and I mean, and we can get way deeper with things talking about the aperture and how long that we should have for shutter speed, and different things like that, and be happy to help with those things. But make sure that you just think about the essentials. All right, get things in focus. That they're developed properly. Rule of thirds. Okay, good backdrop and capture emotion. If you just think about those 4 things, write it down and take it with you if you have to. But your pictures are going to get much better, and it's just something that you'll be able to share, and think about down the road, stuff that you can look back on. It's always nice to have a nice picture, not have to apologize for, oh, the picture doesn't do this justice. Make the picture do more than justice. Don't be afraid to show off what you want to show. And yeah, that's pretty much covers this one.